The night air was cold, sharp with the thinness of the mountain altitude. It carried the faint scent of smoke and dry earth, the kind of smell that told soldiers they were far from home and deep in hostile country. Under a blanket of stars, 381 Navy SEALs moved like shadows across the jagged terrain. Their boots pressed silently into the dirt, their rifles cradled close, their eyes scanning every ridgeline. This was supposed to be straightforward. Intelligence reports had marked the enemy's stronghold as significant but not overwhelming, no more than a few 100 insurgents entrenched in an old valley fortress. It was the kind of mission that elite warriors trained for: fast entry, surgical strikes, demolition of weapons caches, and extraction before the enemy could mount a serious response. Confidence was high. These weren't just any SEALs. This was one of the largest special operations task forces ever deployed together, a force carefully assembled for a decisive blow. The men carried themselves with the calm of experience. Many had fought through Iraq and Afghanistan. They knew chaos. They knew risk. But this was supposed to be clean. As they neared the valley, the silence broke. The first pops of gunfire echoed from somewhere in the distance, sharp, scattered bursts that might have been scouts or sentries. Nothing unusual. The SEALs pressed forward, their formation tightening, night vision goggles glowing faintly in the dark. Hand signals passed silently among them. Stay low, stay ready. But then came the first problem. Comms chatter grew faint. Voices cut in and out, distorted by static. The team leaders tried to raise command on secure channels, but the signals collapsed into garbled noise. What had been crystal clear minutes ago was suddenly fractured. It was as though the valley itself had swallowed their voices. "Jammer?" one operator whispered. "Or terrain," another replied, though doubt clung to his voice. Still, they advanced. The plan was too far in motion to turn back. The fortress loomed ahead, a collection of stone buildings tucked into the cliffs, half hidden by the shadows. For a moment, it looked abandoned. No guards on the walls, no patrols moving between structures. It was too quiet. The SEAL commander, a grizzled lieutenant with a decade of combat under his belt, narrowed his eyes. "Something's off," he muttered. He didn't have to wait long to find out what. The first explosion ripped through the night like thunder. Mortar shells screamed from the ridges, slamming into the ground around the SEALs. Dirt and fire shot into the sky, throwing men off their feet. Automatic gunfire erupted from the cliffs, tracer rounds streaking like fiery darts across the valley. It wasn't a few hundred insurgents. It was thousands. The fortress had been bait. From the ridgelines, enemy fighters poured into view, their silhouettes lining the high ground, weapons blazing. Machine gun nests, mortar, and RPG teams revealed themselves in flashes of light. The valley that had looked empty was now a kill box. The SEALs were trapped in the center, surrounded on nearly every side. "Contact front. Contact left. Multiple," shouted one squad leader, returning fire as his men scrambled for cover. Rifles barked in reply, the disciplined bursts of SEAL training cutting through the chaos. Dozens of insurgents dropped in the first minutes, but for every fighter that fell, more seemed to appear from hidden bunkers and tunnels. The cliffs spat out wave after wave. The SEALs fell back into defensive positions, hugging the boulders and shallow ridges, setting up overlapping fields of fire. Machine gunners laid down suppressing fire, while sharpshooters scanned for RPG teams. Medics dragged the wounded behind cover, hands red with blood in the glow of exploding mortar. "Where the hell are the birds?" Someone yelled into a broken radio. No answer. Extraction had been part of the plan. Black Hawks, waiting on standby to swoop in once the objective was complete. But with guns down and anti-aircraft fire already streaking across the sky, no helicopter could make it in. The enemy had planned this. Every angle, every move, it was a trap designed not to defeat a SEAL team, but to annihilate one. Hours passed in a blur of smoke and fire. Every attempt to push toward an exit was met with overwhelming resistance. Every time a squad advanced, they were driven back by withering fire from the cliffs. The wounded piled up, but the medics never stopped moving, their bravery as steady as the gunners who fired until their barrels smoked. The SEAL commander knelt behind a shattered boulder, studying the map with a flashlight dimmed by tape. The red circles marking enemy positions were now meaningless. The valley wasn't a battlefield, it was a cage. "Sir, if we stay pinned, they'll grind us down," one of his chiefs said, his voice tight but controlled. The commander nodded grimly. "We hold until we find a break. That's all we can do." But deep down, he knew breaks don't come easy in a trap like this. By the second night, ammunition was dwindling. Food was nearly gone. Water was rationed by the mouthful. The wounded groaned in the shadows, some conscious, some not. And still, the enemy pressed. Mortar rained with brutal rhythm, every hour another reminder that the siege wasn't loosening. Morale teetered on the edge, but the SEALs clung to discipline. They shared ammunition, rotated shifts on the heaviest guns, whispered encouragement to each other in the darkness. These were America's most elite warriors, and if this valley was going to be their grave, they'd make the enemy pay for every inch. But whispers started spreading among the ranks. Not fear, never fear, but a question that none dared voice too loudly. Where was command? Where was support? The answer came in the form of a single message, finally breaking through the static after nearly 48 hours. The commander pressed his earpiece tight, straining to hear. "Hold position. Air support inbound. Stand by." It wasn't much, but it was enough to spark a flicker of hope. Air support meant firepower. Air support meant maybe, just maybe, a way out. But even that hope was fragile. The valley was crowded, SEAL positions scattered close to enemy lines. One wrong strike could be as deadly as enemy fire. The commander clenched his jaw, eyes lifting to the sky, hidden behind clouds of smoke. He didn't know who was coming. He didn't know if they could make a difference. But he knew one thing with certainty. If help didn't arrive soon, 381 SEALs would vanish in a valley no one outside this mission would ever hear about. The first night was chaos. The second was worse. By dawn, the valley was a furnace of fire and steel. Mortar rounds fell with mechanical rhythm, each blast shaking the ground like an earthquake. Jagged stones turned into shrapnel. Dust and smoke filled the air, choking lungs and stinging eyes. The SEALs had dug themselves into whatever cover they could find behind shattered boulders, in shallow trenches scraped into the dirt, under broken walls of old stone huts. They were fighting a battle designed to break them, and the enemy knew it. Every ridgeline spit death. From above, insurgents poured gunfire down like rain. Heavy machine guns stitched lines of tracer fire across the valley floor, pinning down anyone foolish enough to move. RPGs arced overhead, their warheads slamming into rock with devastating bursts. Snipers, hidden in the jagged cliffs, hunted for helmets and exposed hands. Every time a SEAL peeked out, there was a bullet waiting. The enemy had numbers hundreds, maybe thousands. They also had patience. This was no wild, disorganized ambush. It was a siege, carefully orchestrated to trap and bleed out the Americans. By mid-morning, the SEAL commander moved from position to position, checking on his men. His uniform was scorched from near misses, his voice hoarse from shouting orders. Rotate fire teams. Keep the pressure balanced. Ammo conservation. You know the drill. He barked. The SEALs obeyed without hesitation. Each man knew his role. Squad gunners laid down suppressive bursts while riflemen fired in disciplined rhythm. Snipers on the SEAL side sought out RPG teams, taking them down before they could reload. Medics crawled through dirt and blood, dragging wounded men into makeshift triage zones shielded by sandbags and collapsed walls. Despite the discipline, the cracks were showing. Ammunition was running low. Resupply birds had tried to push through the night before, but were driven off by streaks of anti-aircraft fire. Food was nearly gone, and water was rationed to half canteens. Some men had been awake for nearly 36 hours, eyes bloodshot, nerves fraying. And still the enemy came. At noon, the insurgents launched a massive push, waves of fighters charging down the ridges with rifles and machine guns. Their war cries echoed through the valley as they surged forward. The SEALs met them with disciplined, fire-short, brutal bursts that cut down dozens before they reached the valley floor. Grenades arced out, detonating among the attackers, sending bodies tumbling. For every insurgent that fell, 2 more seemed to take his place. The ground was littered with shell casings, dust mixing with blood. In the middle of the chaos, Petty Officer Ramirez manned a machine gun nest, his hands blistered from hours of firing. He leaned into the weapon, screaming over the roar as he swept enemy lines. His partner reloaded belts as fast as he could, brass flying in every direction. "They just keep coming," Ramirez shouted, teeth gritted. "Then we keep shooting," his partner yelled back. Further down the line, a young SEAL barely out of training huddled behind a rock, his chest heaving. He had already fired nearly every magazine he carried. His hands shook as he checked his last clip. A veteran beside him noticed, resting a hand on his shoulder. "Breathe, kid. We're still in the fight," the older man said, calm despite the chaos. The younger SEAL nodded, steadied himself, and loaded his last mag. Discipline, not panic, that was the SEAL way. As the battle dragged on, communication with command remained fragile. Static drowned most transmissions, but every now and then a fragment broke through. "Hold position. Air assets. Stand by." It wasn't enough. By the second evening, exhaustion weighed like chains. The wounded lay in rows behind the lines, some whispering prayers, others silent. Medics did what they could with dwindling supplies field dressings made from torn uniforms, morphine rationed drop by drop. A chaplain attached to the unit moved quietly among them, offering words of comfort even as shells fell nearby. The SEAL commander crouched beside a wounded man whose leg was mangled by shrapnel. The soldier's face was pale, his voice weak. "Sir, are we getting out of here?" he asked. The commander paused, then gave a firm nod. "We're SEALs. We don't stay down. Hold on, we'll get you home." It was part truth, part hope, but it steadied the man's breathing. Night fell again, bringing no relief. Enemy mortar shifted to harassing fire, bursts every few minutes to deny rest. Snipers fired at shadows. Exhaustion clawed at the SEALs, but they took turns sleeping in shifts, rifles cradled in their arms. By the third dawn, the siege was a nightmare without end. Ammunition belts were nearly dry. Some men counted their rounds individually, saving them for the right targets. Grenades were gone. Rations were crumbs. The sun rose red through the smoke, casting the valley in an eerie glow. And yet, the SEALs fought on. They adjusted tactics, shorter bursts, tighter discipline, creative use of terrain. When one position became too dangerous, they shifted, regrouped, and fought from another. They were battered, but not broken. Still, morale was fraying. In hushed conversations between bursts of gunfire, men spoke of family, of home, of the possibility that they might not leave the valley alive. No one said it loudly, but the thought hung in the air like smoke. The commander gathered his officers around a map scratched into the dirt. "They've got the ridges locked. both north and south, he said, drawing lines with his stick. Our only chance is air. If they get us fire from above, we can punch through the pass. One officer shook his head. We don't even know if the birds can get through. Their A is brutal. Then we pray they send someone crazy enough to try, the commander replied, his voice low but steady. Silence fell for a moment. Then another officer spoke. We hold until they come, however long it takes. The men nodded. They knew the cost. They had sworn the oath. As the sun climbed higher, the enemy launched another wave. The SEALs braced themselves, weary but unyielding. The valley thundered with gunfire and explosions once more. And above the chaos, one thought burned in every man's mind. If help doesn't come soon, this valley becomes our grave. In the dim glow of screens and maps, the operations center buzzed with a tension that felt like static in the air. Officers moved quickly between consoles, voices clipped, eyes fixed on the chaos unfolding across the valley on live drone feeds. Red markers swarmed the digital map, enemy positions multiplying like ants. Blue icons representing the 381 SEALs were trapped in the center, their perimeter shrinking by the hour. A colonel leaned over the table, jaw clenched, one hand pressing his headset tight. His voice was calm, but the knuckles on his fist were white. Status update. Sir, they've been holding for over 48 hours, replied an intelligence officer. Wounded count rising. Ammo is critically low. They're at risk of being overrun within the next cycle. The colonel exhaled sharply, his breath fogging against his coffee cup, long gone cold. He had led men before. He knew the math. If the SEALs didn't get relief soon, they'd be wiped out. The thought tightened around his chest like a vice. Why haven't the resupply birds made it through? He asked. Enemy has manpads all over the ridges. Every time our helicopters approach, they're painted and forced to break off. Too hot for insertion. The colonel slammed his fist against the table, rattling pens and empty mugs. Then get me something that can fly through fire. We can't leave them to die in there. But the room already knew the truth. Ground reinforcements would take too long to arrive. Helicopters were suicide runs. Drones could drop limited payloads, but nowhere near enough to break the siege. That left only one option: close air support. Close air support CAS meant flying low, striking surgically close to friendly troops. It meant threading the needle between annihilating the enemy and risking friendly fire. In a valley where the SEALs and insurgents were sometimes separated by less than 100 yards, CAS was a nightmare scenario. One wrong pass could kill the very men it was meant to save. Still, it was all they had left. The colonel's voice lowered, heavy with the weight of the decision. All right. Put in the request. Get me fast movers. Get me thunderbolts. Get me something. The comms officer hesitated. Sir, it's a mess down there. Danger close strikes across the entire valley. We'd need a pilot willing to fly blind into a meat grinder. The colonel's eyes hardened. Then find me someone crazy enough. Far above the desert, Captain Sarah Donnelly's A-10 Thunderbolt, too known simply as the Warthog, cut through the early morning sky. The aircraft was ugly by design, a flying tank with stubby wings and a massive rotary cannon strapped to its nose. But ugly or not, it was feared and respected. Its 30mm GAU-8 Avenger could chew through armor like paper. Donnelly's headset crackled as the request came through. She listened in silence, her eyes scanning the horizon. A trapped SEAL task force, surrounded, no safe way out. Her co-pilot's voice broke the silence. That valley's suicide. Everywhere. Too close for clean runs. Command wants surgical precision in the middle of chaos. Donnelly tightened her grip on the stick, her knuckles pressing against her gloves. She'd flown dozens of missions before, some hairy, most demanding. But this was different. It wasn't just a few squads of men. It was 381 American warriors. If they fell, it would be one of the worst special operations disasters in U.S. history. Her voice was steady, almost calm. "I'll take it." Her co-pilot glanced at her in disbelief. "Sarah, this is—" "Yeah," she said, cutting him off, eyes still fixed on the horizon. "But they're ours. And they're not dying in that valley." She keyed her mic, her voice carrying across the comms channel. "Command, this is Viper 1. Vector me to the fight." Back in the valley, the SEALs were barely hanging on. Mortar fire pounded the ground, men shouting over the din as they shifted positions. A corpsman pressed bandages into a man's shoulder wound, trying to stop the bleeding with hands already slick with blood. Ramirez, the machine gunner, was down to his last belt. The commander pressed his ear to his headset again, hearing the faintest crackle through the static. "Air inbound. ETA 5 minutes?" He didn't believe it at first. Air, after all this time? His men needed more than promises. They needed thunder. At 30,000 feet and descending, Donnelly studied the drone feeds transmitted to her cockpit. Red markers swarmed like hornets, green dots flashing dangerously close. She knew what those dots meant. Sealed positions scattered among the enemy. One wrong trigger pull, and friendly lives would be gone. Her co-pilot ran through the checklist, voice rapid. Targets on ridges, mortar nests, armored trucks blocking the pass. All close to friendlies. "Doesn't matter," Donnelly replied, her eyes narrowing as the valley came into view. "We take the shots. We open them a path." She dropped lower, the A-10 shuddering as it skimmed the ridges. Tracer fire streaked up toward her, green and red lines tearing through the night. The cockpit rattled as rounds snapped past the fuselage. "Taking fire already." Her co-pilot shouted. Donnelly's face was calm, her voice level. "Good. Means we're in the right place. Inside the valley." SEALs looked up as the distinct growl of turbines rolled through the smoke-filled air. The sound was unmistakable. Some of the men, exhausted and bloodied, allowed themselves the faintest smiles. "Warthog," one whispered. The SEAL commander raised his head, eyes scanning the skies. Relief flickered across his face for the first time in days. "Boys," he said, his voice low but steady. "Our ride just showed up." From the cockpit, Donnelly lined up her first run. Enemy mortar teams were setting up on the ridges, preparing to rain more death into the SEAL positions. With a deep breath, she armed the GAU-8 cannon. Her thumb hovered over the trigger. She thought of the men below, pinned and outnumbered. She thought of the risk-friendly fire, her aircraft shredded by A fire, never making it back to base. And then she thought of her oath. Her voice was calm, almost a whisper to herself. Time to clear them a path. She pressed the trigger. The Warthog's cannon roared to life, spitting 30mm rounds at an impossible rate. The valley thundered as the shells tore through the ridges, turning mortar crews into silhouettes swallowed by fire and dust. The insurgents scattered, their positions shredded in seconds. For the first time in 72 hours, the SEALs weren't just surviving. They had hope. And Captain Sarah Donnelly wasn't finished yet. The valley looked different from above. From ground level, the SEALs only saw walls of stone, endless muzzle flashes, and clouds of dust choking the air. From 30,000 feet, Captain Sarah Donnelly saw the truth of it. A cage. The jagged ridgelines curled inward like teeth, and the SEALs were the prey trapped inside. Enemy positions glowed red on her targeting systems, scattered across the high ground, overlapping arcs of fire, choking every possible exit. She eased the stick forward, dropping altitude. The A-10 shuddered as it cut into the turbulence, created by the heat of explosions below. The growl of the turbines was steady, reassuring, like the heartbeat of a beast that had been built for this very job. Her co-pilot called out data, fast and clipped. SAM radar lighting us up. Multiple man-pads on both ridges. Heavy machine guns on the eastern slope. Mortar still active on the northern ridge. Copy, Donnelly said, her voice even, her eyes fixed on the valley below. She had long ago learned to silence fear. Fear wasted seconds. Seconds killed soldiers. She pulled her helmet visor down, the green glow of the targeting HUD painting her vision. Her thumb hovered near the master arm switch. Viper 1 to ground team, she called, voice breaking through the static on the SEAL commander's headset. SEAL Actual, this is your Angel on station. Confirm positions. Mark with infrared if able. For a moment, only garbled noise came back. Then, faint but unmistakable, a gravel-rough voice. This is SEAL Actual. 381 men holding grid Sierra Delta 142. Surrounded on all ridges. Multiple wounded. You're our only chance. The words were flat, matter of fact, but Donnelly heard the exhaustion beneath them. Days of fighting, no food, no water. And yet the voice didn't shake. SEALs didn't shake. Roger that, SEAL Actual. I'm going to clear you some breathing room. She dropped lower. Tracers stitched the air around her, green fireflies racing past her wings. The A-10's armor clanged with impacts, rounds sparking harmlessly off the titanium bathtub that encased her cockpit. This was what the Warthog was built for: flying low, taking punishment, and giving back 10 times more. Pick the mortar first, her co-pilot said, pointing at the northern ridgeline on the display. They're tearing the SEALs apart. Agreed. She lined up the run. The HUD locked onto the mortar positions. Enemy crews frantically loading shells into tubes. Through her scope, she could almost see their faces, oblivious to the death screaming toward them at 400 knots. She squeezed the trigger. The GAU-8 Avenger cannon roared, the aircraft vibrating with the recoil. The valley thundered as a river of 30mm shells tore across the ridge. Mortar vanished in blossoms of fire and dirt. Enemy bodies scattered like leaves in a storm. Guns, guns, guns. Donnelly shouted, the ritual call echoing in her headset. On the valley floor, the SEALs looked up. The growling BRRT of the cannon was like nothing else in war, a sound that carried salvation for some and terror for others. To the SEALs, pinned and bloodied, it was the voice of hope itself. Warthogs on station. Ramirez shouted over the gunfire, a grin breaking across his dirt-streaked face. Even the wounded stirred, eyes lifting toward the sky as the A-10 banked overhead. For a moment, their hell was lit by fire from above, and it wasn't enemy fire. But Donnelly knew this was just the start. The valley was alive with enemy fire. Surface-to-air missiles streaked upward, their white trails cutting the smoke. She yanked the stick, flares exploding behind her, decoys pulling the missiles off course. The cockpit rattled with turbulence as she rolled out, barely clearing the ridgeline. Close call, her co-pilot muttered, wiping sweat from his brow. Not close enough, Donnelly replied, already lining up her next pass. This time, she went for the machine gun nests on the eastern slope. Enemy crews had been chewing into the SEAL perimeter non-stop, bullets hammering rocks inches from men's helmets. She nosed down, locked on, and unleashed another burst. The nests vanished in explosions of stone and flame. Eastern slope cleared, her co-pilot confirmed. Donnelly pulled up hard, the gi forces pressing her into the seat. She stole a glance at the valley floor below. Tiny figures moved among the rock SEALs regrouping, dragging the wounded, firing back with renewed vigor. She could almost feel their relief, their determination sparking back to life. But she also saw the danger. Insurgents were already moving reinforcements into position. RPG teams climbing into new nests, trucks rumbling toward the mountain pass with fresh fighters. It was a never-ending tide. "They're not giving up," she muttered. "Neither are we," her co-pilot said. On the ground, the SEAL commander pressed his radio. "Viper 1, this is SEAL Actual. Your runs are effective. Request you target vehicles blocking the western pass." "That's our only way out." Donnelly processed the request quickly. The pass. It was narrow, treacherous, and heavily fortified. If she could clear it, the SEALs might have a chance to break free. If she failed, they'd remain caged rats in a valley of fire. She didn't hesitate. "Copy that, SEAL Actual. I'll open your door." She banked wide, engines roaring, then came in low and fast, skimming the ridges so close she could see the muzzle flashes of rifles firing up at her. Her HUD locked onto the vehicles barricading the pass-armored trucks, sandbagged emplacements, enemy fighters swarming around them. "Engaging," she said. The cannon erupted again, its thunder rolling like a storm across the valley. Shells tore into the barricades, turning steel into twisted wreckage. Trucks exploded, flames lighting the mountainside. Fighters scattered, diving for cover that no longer existed. The pass began to clear. "SEAL Actual, corridors opening," Donnelly radioed. "Push when ready. I'll keep it clean." On the valley floor, the SEAL commander felt something he had in 3 days: hope. He turned to his men, his voice booming over the chaos. "You heard her. That's our exit. Prepare to move. We're getting out of this valley." A ripple of energy passed through the battered warriors. They weren't safe yet, not even close, but now they had a chance. And sometimes in war, a chance was all you needed. High above, Donnelly circled, watching the battlefield with a predator's patience. She wasn't finished. Not until every last SEAL was clear of the valley. She gripped the stick tighter, eyes scanning for the next threat, the next target, the next opportunity to give the men below one more minute of life. And deep in her chest, beneath the discipline and training, burned a quiet promise. Not one of them dies today. Not while I'm still flying. The GAU-8 Avenger cannon wasn't just a weapon, it was a force of nature. 7 barrels of spinning steel, spitting 30mm depleted uranium rounds at nearly 4,000 a minute, each one capable of ripping through armor like tissue paper. It was the sound of final judgment for anything unlucky enough to be in its path. Captain Sarah Donnelly leveled the nose of her A-10 toward the valley floor, breath steady, fingers tense on the trigger. Below her, the ridgelines were alive with fire. RPG teams kneeling in shadowed crevices, mortar puffing smoke, machine gun tracers lashing out like angry whips. The SEALs were still pressed to the rocks, holding by sheer grit, but she could see the enemy moving to envelop them again. Not today, she thought. She pressed the trigger. The GAU-8 roared. It wasn't just a sound, it was a physical thing, a vibration that rattled her bones, a rolling thunder that seemed to shake the mountains themselves. The A-10 slowed slightly from the recoil, as streams of shells hammered the ridgeline. Explosions blossomed like a string of volcanic eruptions. Enemy bunkers cracked open. Trucks shredded into smoking fragments. Men vanished in clouds of dirt and fire. "Guns, guns, guns!" she called, her voice sharp over the comms. On the ground, the SEALs felt it before they saw it, a deep growl echoing through their chests. A sound they'd heard in training videos, but never so close, never when their lives depended on it. Then came the impacts, a storm of fire carving through the enemies who had pinned them for days. Ramirez ducked instinctively as a wall of rock 10 feet above his head exploded, sending dust raining down. He looked up in disbelief, watching insurgent fighters scatter, their weapons tumbling from ruined hands. He shouted hoarsely over the gunfire, "The hog's here! She's cutting them down!" Cheers broke through the SEAL's exhaustion, raw and unfiltered. It wasn't victory yet, but it was the sound of survival. Donnelly pulled up, banking hard to avoid a streaking missile. Flares burst behind her, drawing the heat seeker away in a flash of light. She gritted her teeth, rolled out of the maneuver, and lined up again. Her co-pilot read off targets quickly. Armored truck advancing on the southern slope. 2 technicals with mounted .50 cals moving toward the pass. RPG squad setting up on the rocks. "Copy all," she replied. "Let's give them hell." She dove again, the nose of the Warthog steady as a rifle sight. She could almost see the insurgents scrambling, trying to hide behind their own fortifications. But there was no hiding from the Avenger. She squeezed the trigger, another roar tearing through the valley. The armored truck exploded, its fuel tank igniting in a geyser of flame. The technicals were shredded in seconds, metal flying like shrapnel into the fighters who had been manning the guns. The RPG squad simply ceased to exist, their position reduced to a crater. "Southern sector clear," her co-pilot confirmed. Donnelly didn't smile. She couldn't afford to. There were still hundreds of SEALs down there, still bleeding, still pinned. Until they were free, there was no room for triumph. On the ground, Commander Hayes lifted his radio. His throat was raw from shouting, his uniform blackened with dirt and blood. But his voice carried steel. "Viper 1, this is SEAL Actual. Your fire support is surgical. My men are moving. Keep pressure on their heavy weapons. We're advancing toward the pass." "Roger that, SEAL Actual," Donnelly answered. "Stay low and mark your positions with IR strobes. I'll keep your road clear." Hayes looked around at his battered warriors. Faces smeared with grime, eyes bloodshot with exhaustion, but hands steady on their rifles. "You heard her," he barked. "We push now, under her cover. Move the wounded first. We're not leaving a single man behind." The SEALs surged forward in squads, leapfrogging through the dust and shattered stone. Every time enemy fire tried to pin them again, Donnelly's A-10 swept down like an avenging hawk, her cannon cutting new scars into the battlefield. The insurgents weren't untrained rabble. They were dug in, disciplined, and furious at the punishment raining from the sky. Some of them stood their ground, loosing RPGs toward the circling aircraft. Others tried to rush the SEALs with fanatical resolve, screaming war cries as they charged through smoke. Donnelly saw them. She turned her hog sideways, banking into a strafing run so low she could see the whites of their eyes. She fired again, the GAU-8's thunder drowning their cries in an instant. Bodies tumbled, weapons flew from hands, the charge shattered before it began. "Enemy assault neutralized," her co-pilot confirmed. Donnelly's jaw tightened. She wasn't thinking about numbers. She wasn't thinking about the sheer scale of destruction. All that mattered was the men below, their survival, their chance to get home. Hours seemed to compress into minutes. Pass after pass, run after run, the Warthogs stayed in the fight, strafing enemy strongpoints, silencing guns, shredding convoys before they could reinforce the valley. The SEALs pushed steadily toward the pass, dragging their wounded with them, morale surging with every roar of the GAU-8 overhead. By now, the insurgents knew who was killing them. Fighters looked skyward in terror whenever the growl of the cannon echoed through the mountains. Some broke and ran, scattering into the hills, unwilling to face the wrath of the A-10. The battlefield had shifted. What had once been a death trap was becoming a corridor of escape, carved open by precision and relentless firepower. But Donnelly knew she couldn't keep it up forever. Her fuel was running low, her ammo count dipping with each run. Her bird could take punishment, but it wasn't invincible. A lucky shot could still bring her down. Her co-pilot glanced at the gauges, then at her. "We're at 60% fuel, 30% ammo. We can't stay on station much longer." Donnelly's eyes stayed on the valley, watching the SEALs crawling, running, bleeding their way toward freedom. She shook her head. "We stay until they're clear." Every last one. The co-pilot didn't argue. He knew her well enough. They would burn their last drop of fuel, fire their last round, and only then would they leave. On the valley floor, the SEALs felt its momentum shifting, survival within reach. Each man carried someone else's burden, dragging a comrade, carrying extra ammo, laying down cover fire. They were battered, broken, but they were moving. And above them, the hogs circled like a guardian angel, its thunder reminding them that they were not alone. For 3 days, they had been trapped, suffocating under an avalanche of fire. But now, with every burst from the GAU-8, with every strafing run carving their enemies apart, the impossible seemed possible. Hope had a sound, and it was BRRT. The mountain pass was little more than a scar in the rock, a narrow throat carved by centuries of wind and rain. To the trapped SEALs, it was salvation. To their enemies, it was a gate that had to stay shut at any cost. Armored trucks were wedged sideways across the gap. Sandbags and stone barricades had been stacked chest-high, machine gun nests bristling above them. Insurgents in black scarves poured into the defenses, weapons braced, waiting to shred anyone foolish enough to try and break through. From the cockpit of her A-10, Captain Sarah Donnelly studied the pass with cold eyes. Her HUD painted the defenses in angry red. Every one of those markers meant another threat to the men below. Every one of them was a wall that needed to be torn down. "SEAL Actual," she called over the comms, her voice steady. "I see your exit. It's blocked tight. I'll punch it open. Be ready to move the second I call it." Commander Hayes, crouched behind a jagged boulder with rounds sparking off the stone, answered with calm steel. "Copy that, Viper 1. My boys are stacked and ready. You clear it, we'll run." Donnelly nosed the hog downward. The ridges lit up instantly with fire. RPGs arced skyward, heavy machine guns spitting tracers like angry hornets. She rolled, flares spraying behind her as missiles clawed after the heat. Then she leveled out, her cannon aligned perfectly with the barricades choking the pass. She squeezed the trigger. The GAU-8 roared to life, 7 barrels vomiting a storm of 30-millimeter shells. The first armored truck disintegrated, its engine block shredded, flames belching skyward. The second truck toppled sideways as its wheels were ripped apart, its crew diving for cover that no longer existed. Sandbags burst open. The men behind them reduced to shadows in a storm of fire and dirt. Past barricades hit. Her co-pilot shouted, voice shaking with adrenaline. But Donnelly wasn't done. She dipped lower, her cannon hammering a machine gun nest perched above the gap. The position vanished in a flash, bodies tumbling into the ravine. "Corridors opening," she transmitted, pulling up hard. "Go, go, go." On the ground, Hayes didn't hesitate. "You heard the lady. Move, move, move." The SEALs surged forward, boots pounding on shattered rock. Squads fanned out, some laying down suppressive fire, others dragging the wounded toward the pass. The roar of the hogs still echoed in their ears, but enemy fire was already returning. From hidden crevices, insurgents poured out, desperate to plug the gap. Machine guns rattled again, bullets whipping into the dust around the running men. Ramirez was one of the first to the front. He laid down bursts from his rifle, dropping 2 fighters who tried to ream-in a half-ruined nest. "Keep pushing," he yelled, voice raw, throat dry. "She's giving us the window." Behind him, A pair of SEALs carried a wounded comrade on a makeshift stretcher, stumbling under his weight, but refusing to let go. Every few yards, one dropped to fire back before lifting again, sweat and blood streaking their faces. The pass was still choked with rubble and burning wreckage, but it was no longer impenetrable. There was a hole now ragged, smoking, but wide enough for men to squeeze through if they fought for it. Donnelly banked wide, her eyes scanning the ridges. Enemy reinforcements were already rushing downhill toward the gap. Trucks bouncing over rocks, fighters waving rifles, RPGs raised high. If they sealed the pass again, all her work would be for nothing. "Not on my watch," she muttered, pulling the hog into another dive. Her HUD locked onto the lead truck. She fired, and the cannon spat fire. The vehicle erupted in a ball of flame. The fighters around it flung aside like rag dolls. She swung her aim to the second, cutting it down before it could even break. The survivors tried to scatter, but the next burst ripped through them in a rolling explosion of dirt and blood. On the valley floor, SEALs cheered hoarsely as they saw the enemy assault collapse under her guns. The path ahead wasn't safe, but it was theirs. Still, the fight was far from over. RPGs streaked upward, forcing Donnelly to chink and weave, her flare screaming behind her. One missile passed so close the cockpit lit white-hot for a heartbeat, alarms shrieking. Her co-pilot swore under his breath, but Donnelly's hands never wavered. She rolled, climbed, then dipped again, dragging the hog back into the firestorm. "Fuel's down to 40%, ammo at 20, her co-pilot warned. "Plenty left," Donnelly said grimly. "We're not leaving until they're clear." The SEALs fought yard by yard toward the pass. Grenades lobbed into crevices flushed insurgents from hiding. Short, brutal firefights broke out among the rocks, knives flashing, rifles cracking at point-blank range. Every man knew what was at stake. If the pass closed, they were dead. Hayes led from the front, his rifle barking in controlled bursts. A round tore his sleeve, another nicked his helmet, but he never slowed. Through the gap. He roared, pushed them back. Ramirez vaulted a burning truck, landing hard on the other side. He shot 2 fighters who tried to rise from behind a sandbag wall, then waved his squad forward. Clear, clear. Bit by bit, the SEALs forced themselves into the gap Donnelly had carved. Smoke burned their throats, dust blinded their eyes, but every step forward was one step closer to freedom. Above, Donnelly circled tight, her eyes locked on the pass. She watched the SEALs spill through, tiny figures in the chaos, dragging their wounded, firing as they moved. Her chest tightened not with fear, but with fierce determination. They were almost there. She just had to keep the wolves off them a little longer. She dove again, hammering another wave of fighters, trying to regroup on the western ridge. The cannon's roar flattened them, craters chewing apart their cover. The pass held. The SEALs kept moving. Viper 1. Hayes's voice cracked through the coms, rough but strong. "You've done it. We're pushing through. Just keep the ridges clear. You're the only thing keeping them off our backs." Donnelly exhaled slowly, her hands steady on the stick. "Roger that, SEAL Actual. You just keep moving. I'll take care of the rest." The battle stretched into hours, the hog's shadow circling endlessly overhead. Pass by pass, strafing run after strafing run, Donnelly tore holes in every counterattack the enemy tried to mount. She burned through her ammo, her gauges ticking lower and lower, but she never left station. Not while men were still fighting their way through. And at last, through fire and blood and thunder, the impossible happened. The SEALs reached the far side of the pass. Hundreds of them, battered and bloodied, but alive. Donnelly's voice came over the radio one last time, calm and fierce. "SEAL Actual, corridor secure. You're clear of the cage." Keep moving west and don't stop. From the far side of the battlefield, Hayes's reply came back, filled with something she hadn't heard in days. Hope. Copy that, Viper 1. We're moving. And we owe you everything. Above, Donnelly banked her hog in a slow, wide arc, the smoke of the valley curling up into the setting sun. Her fuel was nearly gone, her ammo almost dry. But her mission was complete. The pass was open. The seals were free. And she knew one thing with absolute certainty. Today, the hog had earned its legend. The pass was open, but freedom wasn't guaranteed. It was a jagged wound through the mountains, choked with burning vehicles, collapsed stone, and the bodies of men who had tried to hold it. Smoke clung to the air, thick and acrid, mixing with the metallic tang of blood. For the seals, it was both salvation and death's gauntlet, a bottleneck where any hesitation would mean annihilation. Commander Hayes knew it. Standing at the edge of the gap, he raised his rifle, signaling his men forward. This is it. Move fast, cover each other, and don't stop until we're clear. They surged into the corridor. Ramirez was at the front, boots slipping on shattered stone, rifle barking in short bursts. A machine gun nest hidden in the rocks flared to life, spraying the narrow path with tracers. He dropped to a knee, sighted, and squeezed off 3 shots. The gunner slumped sideways, his weapon falling silent. Nest down, Ramirez shouted, already sprinting again. Behind him, 2 SEALs carried a wounded man between them, his face pale, his uniform dark with blood. We've got him, one panted, barely keeping pace. A 3rd SEAL ran backward, firing at shapes moving through the smoke. Every step was a battle. Above, the roar of turbines returned. The hog was coming back around. Viper 1 to SEAL, actual. Donnelly's voice crackled through Hayes's headset. Heavy movement on your rear flanks. I'm going to sweep them before they pin you in. Copy, Viper 1. Hayes said, voice iron. We're inside the pass. Keep their heads down while we move. The A-10 dipped low, skimming the ridges so close Donnelly could see muzzle flashes spitting up at her. She rolled, lined up her HUD on a wave of enemy fighters charging the valley mouth, and pulled the trigger. The GAU-8 thundered, spewing its final reserves of ammunition. The cannon shells ripped the slope apart, chewing through men, weapons, and rock alike. The charge dissolved into chaos, bodies tumbling, survivors scattering for cover. Rear cleared for now, her co-pilot reported. Donnelly checked her gauges. Ammunition was down to less than 10%. Fuel was bleeding lower than she liked. She swallowed hard, but said nothing. They had enough for one last stand. That was all the SEALs needed. Inside the pass, the SEALs pressed forward relentlessly. Grenades arced overhead, bursting against rock walls. Dust rained down on their helmets as cliffs shook with each detonation. Close-quarters firefights erupted in seconds. Enemy fighters popping out of crags, knives flashing, rifles cracking at 10 feet. The SEALs fought with the fury of men who refused to die. Ramirez grappled with a fighter who lunged from behind a burning truck, their rifles clattering to the ground. The man's blade slashed across Ramirez's vest, sparks flying from a plate. With a grunt, Ramirez drove his elbow into the attacker's jaw, snatched a sidearm, and fired point-blank. He didn't pause. He grabbed his rifle and kept moving, shouting back, "Keep pushing. We're almost there." The bottleneck forced the SEALs to slow, and that was dangerous. Hayes knew if they got jammed inside, they'd be slaughtered. He keyed his radio. Viper 1, we need another sweep ahead of the pass. They're digging in on the far exit. Roger that, Donnelly said. Clearing the path, she banked wide, looping around the mountain. Through the haze, she saw the far mouth of the pass. Enemy trucks had screeched into position, Fighters stacking sandbags, setting up mortar. If the SEALs emerged into that, they'd be massacred. She didn't hesitate. She lined up, nose down, the last belts of cannon shells humming. Guns hot, she muttered, squeezing the trigger. The GAU-8 spoke its final fury. Trucks erupted, flipping sideways. Mortar disintegrated in plumes of dust. Sandbags vaporized, sending fighters sprawling. By the time she pulled up, the exit was no longer a fortress. It was a graveyard. "Exit clear," she transmitted. "Get them out. Hayes, that's all I've got left." The SEALs burst through the last stretch of the corridor like a tidal wave. Fresh air hit their lungs, and though the battlefield was still chaos, the sense of escape electrified them. Wounded were hauled on shoulders, stretchers were dragged over rocks, and squads fanned out to cover the final approach. Hayes stumbled out last, chest heaving, helmet cracked, but rifle still in his hands. He turned to see the long column of his men pouring through. 381 had entered the valley. 381 were walking out. Above, Donnelly circled one final time. She had no cannon rounds left, no missiles, barely enough fuel to limp home. Yet she stayed overhead, banking slow and steady, her presence a shield. The insurgents, bloodied and broken, no longer charged. The hog's shadow kept them pinned, unwilling to face the beast again. On the ground, the SEALs gathered in the shadow of the ridges, catching their breath, reloading weapons, patching wounds. Ramirez dropped beside Hayes, sweat streaking his dirt-stained face. "Sir," he rasped, "we made it." Hayes nodded, his eyes lifting skyward. The A-10 banked into the sunlight, its paint scorched, its wings scarred, but still flying. "She did it," Hayes said quietly. The men followed his gaze. And for a moment, every rifle lowered, every hand stilled. They watched the hog's slow, circling vigil, knowing the truth in their bones. Without that pilot, they would all be ghosts in a valley of stone. Donnelly finally keyed her comms, her voice hoarse from hours of strain. "SEAL Actual, this is Viper 1. You're clear." "Repeat, you are clear." Hayes raised his radio, his voice firm despite exhaustion. "Viper 1, from all 381 souls on the ground, you brought us home. We'll never forget it." Donnelly's throat tightened, but she kept her tone steady. "Copy that, Commander. Glad to be of service. Now get your boys out of here." As she pulled the hog into a final banking turn, the sun dipped low over the mountains, painting the battlefield in red-gold light. Her fuel light blinked. Her ammo racks were empty, but she had done what she came to do. And below, 381 SEALs were alive to prove it. The valley was quiet now. The thunder of cannon fire, the rattle of rifles, the scream of rockets, all of it had faded into echoes, carried off by the wind through jagged ridges. Smoke still curled from overturned trucks and ruined sandbag emplacements, and the scent of scorched earth and spent gunpowder hung heavy in the air. But amidst the ruins, life persisted. 381 SEALs bloodied, bruised, exhausted stood upright for the first time in nearly 4 days. They were alive. Every man counted. Every wounded soldier accounted for. And it was all because of the woman who had taken to the sky above them, fearless, relentless, and unwavering, Captain Sarah Donnelly. Commander Hayes walked among his men, inspecting, encouraging, ensuring that every wounded had received aid and that morale, though battered, was intact. His eyes, however, kept drifting upward. Somewhere above, the hog was still circling, keeping watch, even as its fuel dwindled, its ammo spent, and its pilot's energy was all but gone. "Gentlemen," Hayes said, his voice carrying over the hushed murmurs of his men, "we made it. Every last one of us, alive. That's not luck, that's skill, Courage and one hell of a pilot watching our backs. The SEALs exchanged glances, their exhaustion mirrored in every face. Some smiled weakly. Others sat heavily against rocks, bandaging wounds, their hands still trembling from adrenaline. Yet there was a unanimous recognition. Today, they had been saved by a force that was almost mythic. Donnelly, circling high above the pass, could see it all. The SEALs were moving westward now, regrouping and assessing their casualties. The men were upright again, walking tall despite fatigue and pain. They carried their fallen comrades' memories in their minds, but they carried themselves forward with the resolve that only warriors who had stared into the abyss and survived could muster. She keyed her mic one last time. "SEAL Actual, this is Viper 1. You're safe now. Head west, rendezvous at LZ Alpha. I'll be leaving shortly." Hayes's voice came back, steady and full of respect. "Roger that, Viper 1. You've earned our gratitude, and then some. You just wrote yourself into our history." Donnelly allowed herself a brief smile, feeling the weight of the mission lift ever so slightly. But there was no time for celebration. The Hog needed fuel, and she needed to return to base. She rolled the aircraft gently, preparing to leave, when something unexpected happened. Below, the SEALs stopped moving. Hayes raised his hand, and his men froze, attention turning skyward. One by one, they raised their rifles, helmets lifted, and then salutes. Not a single shout, no cheering. Just a slow, unified gesture of respect. A salute that carried across the distance, across the chaos of the valley, toward the woman who had risked everything to save them. Donnelly's heart tightened. She tipped her wings slightly, acknowledging them, but she didn't descend. The salute was enough. It was a recognition that transcended words, a silent bond between those who had faced death together, one from the ground, one from the sky. Ramirez, kneeling beside a comrade he had carried through the pass, watched the Hog's shadow glide across the rocks. He whispered, almost to himself, "She saved us. All of us. No one's ever going to forget this day." Hayes nodded beside him. "Not ever. That woman, you don't get to fly like that without being something more than human. Viper 1 isn't just a pilot. She's a guardian." The men around them lowered their weapons, shoulders sagging as exhaustion finally began to catch up. Yet their eyes never left the sky. Every trace of gunpowder and dust was a reminder of what they had endured, and every glance upward a reminder of who had pulled them back from the brink. From the air, Donnelly felt it too. The valley was emptying, the SEALs moving as one toward their extraction point. She banked wide, taking one final look at the battered landscape. Every crater, every twisted metal frame, every sandbag torn to shreds was a testament to the ferocity of the fight. And every man walking away alive was a testament to precision, courage, and determination. Her co-pilot broke the silence. "Sarah, they're looking at us." "That salute, they mean it." Donnelly nodded, her hands resting lightly on the stick. "I know, and they'll carry it forward. That's what counts." Then, gently, she began to climb. She had given everything she could, every round, every maneuver, every ounce of concentration. Now it was time to return to base. On the ground, Hayes watched until the Hog disappeared over the ridges. The wind carried a faint echo of its engines, and for a moment, it was as though the valley itself exhaled. The men lowered their helmets, some with tears streaking their dust-smeared faces. "Today," Hayes said quietly, "we were trapped. Today, we should have been lost. But we weren't, and that's because one pilot didn't quit. One pilot didn't turn away. One pilot went to hell and back so we could come home." A young SEAL, barely more than a boy, looked at his hands, bloodied but unbroken. "I want to be that pilot one day," he whispered. Another nodded. "We all do." She set the standard, The valley remained quiet, scarred and shattered, but alive. And the story of Captain Sarah Donnelly Viper 1, the A-10 pilot who had blasted open a path for 381 SEALs trapped in certain death, was already becoming legend. That evening, at LZ Alpha, as helicopters began to lift the men toward safety, Hayes gathered them once more. Every man here owes his life to the skies today. Remember that. Carry it with you. Salute when you can. And never forget heroes don't always wear medals. Sometimes they're just out there, in the sky, keeping their word. The men did as commanded. They saluted again, this time not at a distant aircraft, but toward the sky itself, in memory of a guardian angel etched forever into their hearts. And high above, Captain Sarah Donnelly returned to base, spent, empty, but fulfilled. She didn't need thanks. Her mission had been its own reward. But she carried with her the knowledge that 381 men were alive because of her courage and precision. The Hog had landed, but the legend had taken flight. And in the annals of history, that day would never be forgotten.